Well, thank you all for being here. And Don, thank you for being with us today. I really appreciate you taking the time. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Don Oglesby, who is the president and CEO of Homes of Hope. And I want to share a little bit about Homes of Hope. This is our Faith Talk presentation, part of what we call ARBC information. So we've been gathering in different ways of being church on Wednesday nights throughout the spring. So sometimes we've just been gathered around tables at restaurants and sometimes downstairs in our fellowship hall. Sometimes we've been gathering just for fun and for play. There have been times we've been going out into the world to do some mission work as well. But one of the things that we have enjoyed most of all is inviting some speakers from the community to come in and share with us about their work. This started really out of an outpouring of our vision. And one of the things we wanted to do was make sure that our congregation gains an understanding of vocation. That there is some sense that everyone is called by God and equipped by God to do something in the world. Particularly as people of the Christian faith, we understand that as to be something to further the kingdom of God, to bear witness to Jesus Christ in whatever way that they are able. And so it's been my great honor to bring some people that I've gotten to know from our community who are doing phenomenal work like you, and some other people like we've mentioned, Dan Wiedenbender and Carrie Nettles from the Julie Valentine Center, and Susan McClarty from the Greenville Homeless Alliance, and to share about the intersection of their faith life and the work that they're doing. And so it's my pleasure tonight to introduce to you Don Oglesby, who I've had a good opportunity to get to know a little bit. Some about Homes of Hope that I want to make sure that you know. That Homes of Hope, their mission is to rebuild communities and individual lives through housing, economic, and workforce development. Their vision is to provide opportunities for generational change throughout South Carolina. They strengthen whole communities, providing opportunities for residents to succeed. I pulled some information from the 2018 Impact Report on the Homes of Hope website that I'd encourage you all to go and find out more that way. Download that and see about all of the good work that they're doing. Don had a great quote in there that I just wanted to pull, so I hope that was okay. But he said, true impact happens when people are changed to the point of no return. He says, we like to call it generational change. I look forward to talking a little bit more about generational change. He says it's change that impacts our children and grandchildren, which of course then impacts whole communities. Through housing, economic, and workforce development, we rebuild communities and lives with the aim towards generational change. And our hope is that through this work, people will begin to dream again. What a beautiful sentiment. For over 20 years now, Homes of Hope has invested over $73.4 million into communities across South Carolina. They've developed over 600 homes, I believe, and they have graduated over 300 men from their workforce development program. And in 2018, they won the Jontz Rehabilitation Award for Historic Renovation Excellence from the South Carolina Municipal Association for their first mixed-use development for the renovation of the First National Bank in Clinton, South Carolina, which is just an exciting, innovative way of looking, I think, at housing and some of the things that we can talk about change in the community and stuff like that. So I'm really excited about that. So Don, thank you so much for being with us. I'd like to start our conversation tonight just by getting you to tell us a little bit about yourself. First off, just very general background information. Tell us a little bit about you and about your family. Let's just start there, and then I want to hear more about your faith journey.
Thanks for having me. I don't think I've ever been asked to talk about me or my family before I talked about Homes of Hope. So that I'll just say that threw me for a loop. But I do have a family. Sometimes they like me. Most of the time not. But I do have two beautiful daughters who I tell them they got all their brains from me because I don't have any left. And very smart girls. They married well and got me 3 grandsons, which is really nice that I'm enjoying those. Even though with 2 daughters, when you raise 2 daughters, I don't know what to do with little boys. When they whine and say my diaper needs changing, I'm like, man up, son. What's wrong with you? With a little girl, I can just pick her up and say, it'll be all right, Daddy's here. So I'm learning about that. But I've lived in South Carolina for 30 years. I just turned 60 a few months ago, so I officially have lived in South Carolina more than half my life now, which I think qualifies me to be called a native South Carolinian.
There you
So
go. That's close enough.
that's what I'm claiming anyway. Originally grew up in Alabama. Only time I brag on being from Alabama is at college football season. The rest of the time I don't tell that very often. So that's who I am. I have been with Homes of Hope since the beginning, 20 years. We just had our 20-year birthday recently, and been there the whole time. And certainly I'm sure that I'll get to tell you more about that as Matt asks questions, but that's my story. I'm going to stick with it.
That's great. I think that's a good one, except for the Alabama part.
Yeah.
My in-laws are Alabama grads, and so, I have to deal with that as well.
We're kind of arrogant,
Well,
actually.
I'm sitting here between Alabama fans and Clemson fans, and I went to Georgia, so we're just the third one
Yeah.
trying to get into those ranks these days. That's all it is.
Yeah.
So, but tell us a little bit about your faith journey. From our conversation, obviously, your faith in Christ is truly crucial, not only to your whole being, but particularly to the work that you do. So tell us just a little bit about the faith journey that you had growing up, how you found faith in Christ, and how that sort of spoke to you in the work that you're doing now.
Okay, I appreciate that. I was telling somebody earlier that I grew up in a church that looked like this, in a United Methodist Church. As a little boy, I always thought for some reason that God knew me and He loved me, and I didn't really understand why. But I remember thinking really at a young age that God had some plan for me, and this was before I ever really understood what faith was and what all that meant. But it grew me up into a relationship with the Lord that had some really rough places. But at the end, He was preparing me my whole life for what I was born to do, and that's Homes of Hope. It literally is a wonderful place to be in your life when you can say, that's what I was born to do. And I went through business, almost 20 years of business. I was a successful business person, had my own business at one point. And then I thought I found my dream job of being a comptroller and working with money. I was good with numbers. It's the only skill I actually have is I can add. And then really felt a call to do something more meaningful. And just the word ministry came to mind all the time. And so I went to Bible college, became ordained, got a master's degree in theology, thought, this is great. I'm equipped now to do some ministry, and please, Lord, don't make me a pastor of a church. I don't want to do that. So He did, and He actually He handed me the baby of Homes of Hope. I can't take the credit for birthing the baby. There was another person who had the idea, but he's the kind of person that doesn't really know how to raise the baby. So he said, Don, I think this is what you've been preparing for. And so I call him the birth daddy. I'm the adoptive daddy, and raised it up like it was mine, and literally have been on that journey the whole time, and I think I'm going to finish my journey there. I'm 60, so I'm thinking about 70 because my house pays off when I'm 69 and a half. And I figure that's be a good time to turn it over to somebody else. Our faith journey at Homes of Hope is I think it's a special story. Obviously, I'm a little biased, but when we were founded, the founder was a very successful business person, and he said, I'll fund it. This is a great idea. Don, you take it. I'll pay for it. And that was a $500,000 commitment that he made that day. He said, I will fund it $42,000 a month, whatever we determined the budget was. This was 1998. That was a lot of money back then. It's still a lot of money. And so that was a big commitment. And then a year and 3 months later, his industry crashed. Kind of like the housing industry crashed in 2008. His industry just crashed and burned, and he had to sell his business. And he took me to lunch one day, and I knew something was up. And he said, Don, I just have to tell you, I can't give y'all any more money. And he said, what are you going to do? And out of my mouth flew the words, we're going to trust God. And in my spirit, I'm like, what the heck did you say that for? I mean, what? You got no money anymore. But at that moment, I knew that God really birthed Homes of Hope and not me or Tim. And so we literally said, we're going to act like the money's still there. Just go to work, trust God, and act like the money's still there and work hard. And we were in churches every Wednesday night like this and every Sunday night like this, and crying on the altar, say, please help us. We're trying to do a good work, and people would help us. And literally, I said, I'm not going to take a paycheck until everybody can get one every week. And they worked sporadically, the other 4 people, and they would get one every few weeks. We would literally gather in the office every Friday and vote on who got the paycheck that week. Who needs it the most? Keith's car payment is due, so let's get him the paycheck. Ted's payment's due the next month. let's get him the check. And I committed to do that, and I had $300 in the bank, no savings, no assets. My wife is a stay-at-home mom with 2 daughters. So I had no income, nothing to fall back on. But yet, I didn't miss a payment, didn't miss a meal, you can tell that. And literally, God would just send people to us that say, I heard about what you're doing, I love what you're doing, here's some money. One guy said, I'll flip houses and split the profits with you. And I said, well, I don't have any money to help you with that. He said, that's okay. He said, well, I don't have any time to give you or renovate, and I'm not really good at that anyway. That's okay. I said, so you're going to buy the house, you're going to renovate it, use your own money, and split the profits with me? He said, I just love what you're doing, Don. And he did. He probably contributed about half of my 2 years' worth of needs that during that period. All that to say this, God came through. He did call us to existence, but he did make us walk through some wilderness, just like he did in Scripture. And we had to learn how the difference in faith, believing that God can, and trust, believing that God will. If he said it, he'll do it if he called you to it. Now, that doesn't always work when you just want to get a new Cadillac. But it works when he calls you to a work and a ministry, and he did. And to this day, I mean, we've got a staff of 18 people. Our budget's $4.5 million. We built over 600 houses. Matt told you the stats. I still can't believe it. Sometimes I walk around there and say, I would just be happy just to be in our little mobile home office that we had when we started with 4 people, but because that's where God was. And so that's our faith journey. And I believe that God did that, not so I could sit up here and brag on our great faith, but I can brag on him. But I think he did that because it uniquely connects us as a ministry. And a bunch of middle-class people were the ones that started that. But we can connect with people who are desperate every day and wondering if they're going to get evicted or lose their job, or their health is going to drain their savings, and all of those kinds of things that they live on, that kind of faith. It uniquely connects us to them now, and it has been for 20 years. When we can say, let me tell you our story. You can get through this. We can get through this together. I'm convinced today that that's why he put us through the wilderness, just like he did in Scripture, is always to teach us to depend on him. I can preach for a long time. I'll stop.
No, I love that, because I want to hear a little bit more about what desperation teaches you from a faith perspective. Because obviously you have a particular testimony and way that you can identify with those people that you're serving, that someone maybe, me, I grew up with everything that I ever needed. Mm-hmm. And while I can have compassion, I hope, the idea of actually truly identifying and fully understanding what someone is going through when they're truly desperate is still honestly foreign to me. Mm-hmm. So what do you learn about faith when you are in sort of those desperate moments, when you realize you're going in on Friday and it's coming up and you've got your bills that have to be paid as well? You want to be the best servant leader that you can be, but everybody else is got their own needs, and sometimes you have to sacrifice. So what is it about faith that you learn from a sense of desperation?
Yeah, I think, and it's going to be a really simple, short answer, but what comes to mind when you ask the question is that it's real, that God is real. And, when you get to the point where I say the wilderness made me never afraid of anything. When he took us through that, I can literally say I'm not afraid of anything. Am I really not afraid of everything? Well, yeah, if a bear came in today and wanted to eat me, I would be afraid of that. But I don't fear life anymore or death anymore. I really, literally, when you put your faith on the line to that degree, and I always call it the faith that would make you look like a real idiot if God didn't come through. My favorite story is, I call it bus station faith, where this guy in England in World War II era lived on faith, and there's a book about him, and I'll recommend it to you later, but his whole life was just led by God, praying every day, what am I supposed to do? Kind of like George Mueller did, if you're familiar with George Mueller's work. And he was broke. He had no transportation, but he did have a house. And he got a telegram one day that said, your mom's on her deathbed. And he put the thing in his pocket, and he said he immediately heard the voice of the Lord say, go visit her. And she was 6 hours away. He didn't have any money or transportation. He said, okay, put the thing in his pocket. He went home and he packed his luggage, and he went down to the bus station and stood in line. Now you notice I didn't tell you the part of the story where he got the money, right? He just stood in line with no money, fully expecting God to provide for him. And about 2 people back from the window, some man walked up to him and said, fella, I don't know who you are, but God told me to give you this money.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? So that's kind of what we felt like we did, was like, oh, we're just going to act like the money's still there. And when you do faith on that level, and I'm not saying that, again, not to brag on us that we were so great, we were scared to death. But when you do faith on that level, trusting that he really is real, and he does that, you know, you're not afraid of anything anymore, because he really is real. And he is interested in every little part of your life the same way, even though it sounds hard to believe. I've heard people say, God doesn't have time for me. Well, yeah, he does. He actually is outside of the element of time. Yeah. God's not interested in my little problems. Actually, he is, because if he's with you every day, he ain't got nothing else to do but look at your problems, right? So all those things become true and real. And that's the answer to your question.
Oh, that's great. I mean, I think there's a great sense of trust and sort of really faith in that God's going to come through in all difficult circumstances. There's got to be a good sense of learning what contentment is, learning to deal with what you really need versus those things that are really just outside of, they're just comforts is really all they are. Right. And then in addition to that, just gaining a more positive, hopeful perspective on life. I had a professor in seminary who was going through a difficult time. He'd been let go from a church. He had just had twins that were born, and he and his wife had to move in with his in-laws. And they were... He was having a conversation with a mentor of his, and he was saying, I just really don't know what in the world we're going to do, how we're going to make ends meet. I got to get out of my in-laws' house and all this stuff. It's just, everything is just awful. And the mentor was talking to my professor, and he said, okay, so you're telling me you've got in-laws who love you enough to let you into their house. You've got a wife who loves you enough to stick by you even as you left this church. You've got two beautiful young kids. Son, all you don't have is a job, And there's this sense of understanding what has been provided for you and being able to see everything as this great opportunity from God to be a witness in faith and trust. I think that's a beautiful thing. Yeah. In your materials online and some of the other things that we've talked about, when we're talking about sort of the biblical foundations for Homes of Hope, the two passages that automatically come out are Matthew 25 and Matthew 28. Matthew 25, obviously, a very familiar passage where Jesus gives this sort of apocalyptic imagery, where at the end of time, he says essentially, if our faith is judged by anything, it's in the way that we served or did not serve others. And what we did or did not do, we did or did not do it to him. So there's that element of deep service rooted as an expression of our faith. And then Matthew 28, of course, with the Great Commission, go into all the world, making disciples of all nations, baptizing people in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. And I think that's a beautiful holding those two things up together. I read theologian Darrell Guter, who was saying that the part of the problem with the gospel that Americans tend to put forth, and really the world has always put forth, it's always been some form of reduced gospel. Maybe it's all works, maybe it's all salvation, but very rarely do we give this holistic sense that we're called to bear witness, we're called to make disciples, but we're called to serve as well. So how do you work both of those two aspects into what y'all do at Homes of Hope? Okay,
so I think the reason that was our founding verses is what you just said, but also the thought that people, and Matthew 25 says, when I was sick, you took care of me. When I was in prison, you visited me. I was hungry, you fed me. And so there are people in desperate situations. And so when you're in a Matthew 25 situation, you're not terribly interested in Matthew 28 at the moment. Yeah. And so we said, all right, let's try to fix those, knowing that wasn't the real answer. The real answer was Matthew 28 and a relationship with God. But if you're not listening to me until I can fix your Matthew 25 situation, then let's do that. So we look at it as a win-win. If nobody's interested in, we fix their Matthew 25 problem, and we talk to them about Matthew 28, and they're not interested, we've at least fixed their Matthew 25 problem. So it's a win-win. It's both and, not either or. And then, to us, Matthew 28 doesn't necessarily always have to be evangelistic and altar call. It's about a relationship. If anything that we do, we think that we do better than other nonprofits is relationships. We spend the time building relationships with everybody that lives in our homes. And everybody doesn't receive that. Sometimes they say, just leave me alone, and we're okay with that. But if they want to build a relationship of trust, we're there. And we find in those relationships, that's when we can help them beyond housing. So somebody says, well, I'm so thankful that I can afford my house and my energy now, but I'm really having trouble parenting my children, or I really always wanted to go back to school to learn how to be a blank, or I've always wanted to start my own business because I can bake banana bread really well, and I'd love to cater. Whatever the dreams are, they can breathe in our house now. It's time to breathe and just dream again and say, okay, maybe I can do more, and maybe I can start building assets. So even our renters, we encourage them to just start saving money. We call it the 3 B's: budgeting, banking, and building savings. We encourage them to start working on a budget so maybe you can have some savings, and obviously start saving money, and then use a bank for services instead of driving all over town with a money order paying your bills every week. Let's start doing some things that other people do that maybe you've never thought about or been taught. And they don't listen to that through a brochure. They listen to that because they trust us, because we built a relationship with us. So some families don't get that for a couple of years. Some families get it immediately. We think that financial education is our Matthew 28 work, just like it is discipleship, and just like the spiritual element. Financial education gives them tools on their workbench that they can say, all right, I can move up the economic mobility ladder, and maybe I can do better. Our goal for generational change is literally that it really is changed to the point of no return, where you are in a different situation and we've moved somebody else into your house now. You've done better and you've moved on. Otherwise, we're just playing musical chairs with the same people. They're getting evicted every other month before they came to us, but if we house them and they can afford it, but nothing changes, we're still just warehousing people. We're not interested in warehousing people. We really want to see life change happen. And so that's how we do that. Matthew 25 gets their attention. Matthew 25 gets the relationship going. And then God does all those other things. He'll put us in touch with what the real needs are. And we don't try to do all of it either, by the way. If United Ministries has a program on parenting, we're going to help them go to the parenting class and sit there with them the first time and let them do that. We don't have to teach every class and do every budgeting session. We got plenty of folks around Greenville that do that really well. So that's kind of our model of getting to change beyond just the warehousing of the same people over and over.
Yeah, that's great. One more sort of theological line before we really get into the practical nuts and bolts of how you're able to do the successful work that you're doing. When we were sitting in your office now some months ago and sort of talking about this opportunity, one of the things that we talked about was the John 12 passage where Jesus is in the home of Mary and Martha and sitting there with Lazarus and the rest of the disciples. And of course, Mary comes forward and empties the jar of nard on his feet, anoints him for burial and preparation, all that stuff. And of course, that's where he has the line with Judas, where Judas is saying, well, that could be used for the poor. And he says, the poor you will always have with you. I preached on that passage a couple of weeks ago, actually, and I noticed in there, as I was doing the study, that as we read it in the English, we read it almost as an indicative statement. It's just sort of a matter of fact almost. Yeah, the poor is always going to be with you. And you could read that as if to say, well, you've got your life to live. You need to go about your business. The poor will always be there. Get to them when you can. But as you're interpreting it in the Greek, it could also be interpreted not just as an indicative, but as an imperative. That the church, the poor, you must always have with you. It's a must sort of thing. And so there's this sort of feeling that Jesus is saying, if you're going to be my church, the poor have to be involved. You have to be making lives better. You have to be out there lifting people up as only you can by the equipping and the power of the Spirit. So sort of my question to you might be, through your work, what have you learned about having those people as part of the church, as part of the community, your expression of it in particular? How does that bring you closer to Christ? And what do you risk by not having them as part of your community?
Well, I really appreciate the way you phrase that, because that's exactly what I would have said if I was trying to explain that. Is looking at the verse as more of a command than a statement, and so to me, I think about a crowded room that I'm in and nobody knows me, and they go, "Who are you with?" And I say, "Well, I'm with them over there, or that guy in the corner." And they identify now with me. And so, who are you with? If you're with the poor, then they're with you too, and you're identified with them. I think a lot of theology will take you all the way down that road, that your relationship with Christ is strictly judged on your relationship with the poor. And he said, when you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. So that connection is really critical in our own relationship with him and what he's interested in doing. in the world. And so I don't know there would be no alternative for us once we kind of get that, as there really isn't another way to look at that once you understand that. And I just think what I don't like about that verse is the way we normally interpret it. It's just a passive statement that everybody resigns themselves to the poor you'll always have with you. Well, okay. And then you kind of resign yourself to, well, I can only do so much. And then maybe you resign yourself to the work or the effort before or the level of work that you've done in the past. Whereas, no, they're with you. So every time I look at you, I want to see them too. And that's a different ball game there. And I think that really, again, uniquely connects us to the clients that we serve, especially when we don't necessarily have their history. Although I've got 3 employees, well, I've actually got 6 employees that have a history of homelessness or addiction, and some both. And so the connection there is kind of almost easy. The rest of us have never had that. That's the connector for us, is that idea and that thought.
That's great. That's great. So let's get into sort of the way that Homes of Hope works. So on the website and the impact statement and all of that, it talks about a housing first. And that's a big term that's getting thrown around a lot as people are dealing with homelessness, people in housing transition and all that kind of stuff. We talk about a housing first model. So just explain that for us in layman's terms as you understand it. I see sort of a theological connection to the Matthew 25 needs being met and breathing and dreaming again, but put that in a little bit clearer terms for us. What does a housing first model really accomplish?
Yeah, and I guess it's important to talk about that there are 2 connotations for housing first. There's a homeless housing first movement that is really literally says, to my understanding, because we don't necessarily house folks that are literally on the street homeless. But the way I understand it is a lot of programs will say, we'll house you as soon as you pass a breathalyzer, or we'll house you as soon as you do this. And housing first in a homeless connotation is, let's just house you, and then we'll work on those issues. And you have case management and on-site staff to help folks with that. And that's been very successful from my knowledge of it. Our housing first model is literally kind of already said it's the breathing time. When you walk in my door, I don't assume you want to be a homeowner. Everybody is like, when I was started, I thought the same thing. Homeownership is the way to grow wealth. It's the way to grow assets. It's America. This is the way we do that. And if you don't own your house, you're not being successful. And I was on that soapbox. And I still think homeownership is a great, wonderful way to grow assets, and I'm not disparaging that at all. What I am saying is, though, when they walk in our door and they're in desperation, they are not interested in homeownership. Yeah. I mean, the last time your heat pump blew up, didn't you want a landlord to call? Yeah. I did. So there's a benefit to that, but it's also this breathing time. I don't need to save up for a roof one day. I don't need to think about all of those things and my insurance going up. I just need to pay rent for a little while. So we understand that. So our philosophy is, let's house you first. Let's just breathe. Let's just breathe. And then we don't rush you. So one of our best practices is patience. Literally, we say, if you want to be a homeowner and you tell me you don't want to be one for the next 8 years till you get some things in order, that's fine with us. If you never want to be a homeowner, we're okay with that too. Because aren't we all just renters anyway? I mean, really, if you think about it, we're not taking our houses with us. You write your check to a mortgage company, you write one to a landlord. It's kind of the same thing, really. So, but we want to encourage them to do those things, but we want them to have this other space where they can really, really contemplate their life and what they really want. And some of them actually choose to say, I don't care about home ownership, but I am wanting to save my money up so I can go back to school and get a better job and make more money then and not be in poverty anymore. Well, that's cool enough to us. It's the same result. You're out of your situation and you're doing better. So we still want them to own their house if they can, but it's not a must.
Yeah, I love that. There's a sense of stewardship in there too, that we're all stewards of whatever we have at the time, and we need to do the best that we can for those who are going to be coming after us as well, and use it to the best of God's kingdom.
That's right.
So I love that. Y'all express some of your housing philosophies as focusing on quality construction, mixed income neighborhoods, neighborhood revitalization, financial wellness, and good neighbors. So first, tell me about this mixed income neighborhood, why that's important to you. You know, some of us, we have these sort of, in our minds, the idea of what a, quote, desirable neighborhood is. And for the most part, it's probably single income structure, income level there. And you're focusing really on mixed income. What's the importance of mixed income housing?
Yeah, so I'm old enough to have grown up in a neighborhood before we were segregated by incomes. So I'm kind of old, I guess. But I grew up, I just knew my neighbors. And some of them were very wealthy and some of them were moderate income folks, but we were all just neighbors. We knew each other. And so that we lost that as people did better. They moved out of the inner city into suburbs. And then now they're coming back. But the idea of you have resources and I have resources, and if we continue to congregate poverty or low-income people all together in the same block, in the same situation, they're never going to change. There's no sharing of resources because they all have the same ones. Whereas if a person of a higher or middle income lives next door to somebody with low income, they get to know each other, then the next thing you know, this person's sharing a connection with this one that they never would have had otherwise. That doesn't make the middle or higher income people smarter necessarily. We're just more connected. And so, and then the ones that we house that are of higher incomes always tell us, I'm learning more from your people that are low income because they're very resourceful and they know things that I've never thought about knowing. So the interconnection of being a good neighbor and sharing, like we used to share sugar when I was growing up. We'd take a cup of sugar next door, or flour. Nobody does that anymore, but we share social capital. I've always said that social capital is more important than actual capital to a person that needs to get out of poverty. Connect me to resources or people. I don't know about you, but the last 5 jobs I ever had was always because I knew somebody. And if they only know the people that are in this circle, it's just not going to work. So mixed income is very important to us. Market quality, he mentioned, is incredibly important. And when we started affordable housing, you could spot it anywhere. Yeah. You could say that's a cookie cutter, cracker box little house, and that must be one of those affordable housing projects that somebody built. We want to make sure you cannot tell. In other words, our housing is indistinguishable from the market. You can't tell it. And we literally drive you through some of our neighborhoods and say, tell me which ones are market rate and which ones are affordable low income. Yeah. You can't tell because they're the same basic house. They're the same floor plan. Elevations are a little different. They're not the same literally, but they're the same. You know, everybody lives in the same kind of neighborhood, just like any other neighborhood would be. It's very important to us. And then the financial education that's tied to housing, I've already mentioned. That's a principle that we stand on. If we can't give you more beyond your housing. In other words, handing you the key and saying goodbye is not what we want to do. We want to hand you the key and say hello, and let's work with you and build this relationship. And energy efficiency was not mentioned, but that's critically important. We used to house people in the very early days. We'd buy an old house and renovate it. We didn't know what we was doing. We were just doing whatever we could. And we rent it for $400. That was great. Then we found out their power bill was $350.
Yeah.
And they were only making $900. So, you know, how does that work? So you've got to have energy efficiency, and that's critically important for the success of the community. And the community has to be seen as a whole. So Good Neighbors is a best practice for us. We literally put in your lease, if you want to be a knucklehead behind your closed doors, you can. But if it gets on your front porch, it's not acceptable. And we will not renew your lease. Now, we say that legally. Lawyer drew that up better than I did. But it basically says the same thing. We can't evict you for being a knucklehead behind your closed door, but we can not renew your lease. And we have a 1-year lease, so we just tell them up front. If that's the way you're going to behave, we're going to get somebody else in there next year. And they go, I've never heard anybody talk like that. And then they go, that'll be nice because I'd like to have some good neighbors. And we said, we'll start by being one and get to know them. And I tell them to act like a homeowner. I mean, really, can we tell? When we ride through a neighbor, can you tell which one of us are renters and which one are home? I mean, we can guess, but we really can't tell. So, well, that's very important to us to look at it holistically like that.
Yeah. So tell us where your houses are. I mean, I know you've got, obviously you mentioned Clinton that's outside of Greenville, but you've got all across South Carolina, it seems. So where are you concentrated?
We do. I mean, most of them are in Greenville. We would rather be in Greenville than anywhere else. This is our home, and it's getting a little harder to find land that's affordable in Greenville, but we're still working here, and we've got 3 or 4 projects we're looking at that would be of scale here, and then we've got 20 houses under construction right now in Greenville. We've got 72 or something like that under construction across the state at the moment. We've got about 200 in the pipeline. So we're always trying to hit 70 to 100 per year if we can. And we do that by being in other cities. So Clinton, we built a lot. When I'm in Clinton, I have to say Clinton.
Yeah.
You have to say it right.
That's true. That was my Atlanta City boy pronunciation. I apologize.
Yeah, I still say Clinton because it sounds like right. But anyway, we built a lot there. We did renovate the First National Bank building and made housing up top and starter businesses below. Most of the time we're building single-family homes or townhomes or something. A ton of houses in Anderson and Spartanburg. We have housing all the way up in Rock Hill. And then we've got our first two projects I'm real excited about in Columbia and Charleston. They'll come out of the ground this summer, 29 homes in Columbia and 75 in Charleston. And we got some in Georgetown actually too. But so the unique thing is for us, we never would have seen this coming, but those cities all called us. We never went looking for any of that, ever. We never looked for any land anywhere. We never looked for a city to go to. They all call us and say, can you help us? Because we don't have capacity, of nonprofit capacity in our city. You would think Columbia and Charleston would, but they don't. They have people that build high-rise apartments all the time and warehouse low-income people, and that's not a great model. And so we love what you do, Homes of Hope. We want you to be here and build community. And so we're growing because of that, because the need is so strong, and it's exciting to be able to meet the need across South Carolina, not just in Greenville. But like I said, I'd rather be in Greenville, you know.
Yeah. Well, those you serve, how do they get involved with you? What's the program like? How do they get a house? You mentioned a 1-year lease, and then they get kind of integrated into these other service areas and stuff like that with financial wellness and whatnot. But tell me about the process of the people that you see and what you sort of take them through as you're going along.
Yeah, our criteria is really just literally your income has to be low. So, we'll look at the area median income for a county, and if you're below this 100% of that, then you qualify. And then we're going to look at other things. We're going to look if you have a violent criminal history, we're probably not going to rent to you because we've got to think about the whole neighborhood. If you're on the sexual offenders list, I'm sorry, I really feel bad for some of those folks. Yeah. But we can't house you because we got to think about the whole neighborhood. Yeah. So we look at the things the landlord looked at. We call their last landlord and say, did they poke holes in your wall and tear up your porch before they left? Well, if they did, we're probably not going to rent to you either. We're going to look at those things, but we're all about second, third, and fourth chances now. Yeah. If we have a story that goes along with that, and I'm a different person now and we're going to do better, then we're going to give you the chance. But literally that's how it starts, and we have a waiting list of 230 people in Greenville. Now we only take applications every one time a year, 30 days. Wow. Just in September. That's it. We have 350 inquiries for housing every month. So do the math. That's 4,000 on the waiting list if we took applications all the time. It kind of gives people false hope then if you don't kind of cut it off at some point. So it's 230. In Anderson it's almost 100. In Spartanburg it's about 20. The need's just unbelievably overwhelming, and it's not getting any better. Yeah, definitely. It's certainly not. So tell us, transition from the housing to the men's workforce development, because I'm really interested in that. How did that become an aspect of what y'all do? It sounds like the housing was first. Was this an addition, or did it come right alongside? Why addiction in particular? Just talk to us about it. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I'm kind of ashamed I hadn't already mentioned it. So we're just as proud and excited about our men's development program as we are the housing. So it really did come in the initial idea. Tim, that I told you about, had the idea. His initial idea was, let's take mobile homes that he could get for free. Let's renovate them. Let's go down to the rescue mission and bring those guys down there. And he was supporting the rescue mission at the time. Let's bring those guys I see all the time hanging around. Let's teach them some trades. They'll renovate the mobile homes. We'll sell them for $100 a month, $5,000, 50 payments, 0 interest. Great idea, except it's not energy efficient and it's not an asset. But other than that, it was a pretty cool starting idea. And so the men have always been part of what we do, and it evolved from taking guys from the rescue mission to now, today, we wait till they graduate that program and prove to us that they've made a commitment and kept it. And they come into our residential program for 1 year. They live with us, and we teach them stick-built construction. We don't fool with mobile homes anymore. We teach them how to build 4 houses a year from the ground up. And they get certifications from Greenville Tech. So they've got these layered credentials on their resume that I'm clean and sober for 1.5 years. I know how to build housing from the ground up. I've got safety certifications, and I know how to be an electrician. And most of the time they go into the electrical field, and they're getting $16, $17 an hour jobs right out of our program. And we're super excited about that because over the years, when they were just renovating mobile homes, they go to their employer and say, well, I'm clean and sober, I've got a good attitude, and I'm ready to work. And they go, okay, well, what do you know how to do? Well, I know how to tear toilets out of a mobile home. Okay, well, we'll start you out at $8 an hour and hope you succeed. But now they are literally fighting us over our graduates. We have 5 employers that call us and say, tell me when you got the next one, I'll take him. We don't even tell them their name. Steve just calls them up and says, I got another graduate. He's hired.
Wow.
They want them that much because they come out of our program with a work ethic and a good attitude. They understand about not tracking mud in the boss's office and not back-talking him when he yells at you. They understand what to do on the job. And literally those employers say, y'all are outshining my current employees. And we want to hire all you got. And we only have 9 guys at one time. But they are hiring them. And we have, since we partnered with Greenville Tech and started stick-built construction instead of mobile homes, 100% of our graduates are still employed and clean and sober.
Wow.
That's an incredible
That's insane.
stat. Yeah. We were 75 before. So one of the things that's a pillar for us is when they graduate, we want to make sure they've got all the education we want to provide them, and they've got this new attitude, but we want to make sure they've got reliable transportation and affordable housing to go to. Many times they go back to a wife who might have been waiting on them, and sometimes not. Sometimes they have family. Sometimes they have a way to house themselves, but if not, we will absolutely put them on our list, and they can qualify for one of our homes. And when they're with us for a year, at the 9-month mark, we let them go ahead and work for their new employer, but they stay in our house, so there's still accountability and camaraderie. And that 3 months, they save that paycheck up. So now they're ready to purchase a vehicle if they don't have one, and have a deposit for apartment rent or whatever. You know, they've got all this equipment because we don't charge them anything for our house. We feed them, clothe them. They pay nothing. Matter of fact, we give them a weekly allowance of $85 a week. So they save all that up, and then they save up that last 3 months of paycheck. So they're really ready to succeed, whereas before we were kind of, and we had a 75% success rate before. It's pretty good, but we were kind of hoping they succeeded, and now we're almost sure they're going to. So it makes a lot of difference. The Overcomers is where most of our men come from, or the rescue mission, Greenville, Miracle Hill. And so our standard is you have to have graduated a Christ-centered program of recovery. You have to graduate it. You can't just come to us because you went. You got to finish it, and it has to be Christ-centered so that we understand that discipleship is not a foreign concept to you. And then we give you all these skills on top of that. Overcomers is probably 90% of our pipeline because they have like 60 or 70 men in their program any given time, and we only take 9 in at a time. So that's a really steady pipeline. And the Overcomers does a great job of equipping those guys.
So now when you say a Christ-centered program, what kind of groups are you talking about?
Yeah, the Salvation Army has a good recovery program that's Christian-based, and Overcomers is as well. There's a place called Open Door in Clinton, and Transformation Life Center in Anderson. And then there's one in Asheville. I can't remember the name. It's very rare that we ever get a guy from there. But they're just teaching biblical principles along with recovery. That's basically the standard. And it has to be a fixed amount of time that they graduated from.
And what does y'all's discipleship and spiritual formation aspect of that program look like?
Yeah, thank you for asking that too. So the 3 men that run that program are all former addicts and alcoholics themselves. All 3 went on to become ordained ministers. They see this as their church. Sandy knows Ted, who was the very first starter of all those programs, and you know his vision and leadership brought all those men up under him. And since then, Steve has taken over, and all 3 of those guys pour their life into the guys in the program every day. And we call it casual discipleship. So literally, you're working beside them, and you're just talking to them. So well, tell me what's happening in your life. What are you praying for? What's your struggle with? Whatever. Casual discipleship just looks like getting to know people and talk to them. But our guys are trained and equipped on how to talk to them, and they know what it takes to get them out of that situation because they've been there and done that. Me and Matt went in there and taught it. It probably wouldn't be quite as effective because we can't relate to that level, and they can. So when those guys retire, and 2 of the 3 are going to retire probably in about 3 years. They've been with us the whole 20 years. I think the Lord's going to send us another person in that same mold, that's got discipleship ability and construction ability, but maybe they've been there, done that kind of thing too.
Well, let's transition a little bit because we only got a few more minutes left. But thinking about the city overall and sort of the role that Homes of Hope play in sort of addressing some of our overarching city issues. I know gentrification is a big topic right now. Once again, how do you see gentrification taking place? A term you've used and I think others have used as well is gentrification with justice. What does that look like? What are we seeing in our city right now?
Yeah, it is a huge problem, and it's unfortunately with gentrification, once you lose a battle, you don't ever get to fight it again. I mean, once a market comes in and takes over some dirt in a neighborhood, then it's theirs forever, and so the affordability is getting pushed out. Folks that can afford to stay. So there's multiple aspects to that. One of the things we do is we never sell our rental housing in an area that's gentrifying. Now, we will hopefully have that family that qualifies for home ownership. We will build them a house next door and then move somebody else in. So we never lose control of that rental affordable housing that's in the city that's gentrifying. So we're actually adding to the stock if somebody makes it into home ownership. So we look at that as a solution, sort of a weapon against gentrification. And then just trying to land bank, if we can find dollars or donations that we can acquire property and hang on to it, control of the land is everything. And so gentrification has the consequence of driving people out, but it also has the consequence of driving things up. So next year, when we all get our property reassessed, and yes, that's next year, Greenville inner city is going to be in a shock, and I can tell you, when we think it's part of the conversation now, it's really going to rage next year when people's taxes go up. If they're homeowners and they're low income and they can't afford to stay, or they're in a landlord's house that they're paying rent, and he was charging them $600 before, but now his assessed value goes up, so somebody offers him more for his house, or he thinks about flipping it, or he's got to pass on his tax bill to them. Now the rent's too high and they can't afford it, and it's going to be a real problem. Gentrification with justice, to answer your other question, to me it's a kind of a fourfold thing. If you're going to move into a neighborhood and be a gentrifier, and it's going to happen, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to live in a place that you want to live. But don't overbuild. Don't build the space shuttle next door to a 1,200 square foot house. Let's think about the character of the neighborhood and build a nice house for yourself, but don't build a 8,000 square foot 4-story house next to a $1,200 square foot bungalow. So that's one thing. Nobody likes me when I say that, but I'm saying it anyway. So, and then number two, get to know your neighbors. When you lived in the suburbs, you knocked on your neighbor's door to the right and to the left, and you met them, you introduced yourself. Why not do that here? Yeah. Don't build a privacy fence around your house and seclude yourself. Not only get to know the neighbors, but go to the neighborhood association meetings. And when you do, shut up for about a year. Don't say anything, just listen. And then fourthly is share your social capital. Share your contacts and say, hey, you know what, I've gotten to know you now, you're a good neighbor, and you said you might want to go to work at BMW. Yeah. I know somebody down there. And so that's being a good neighbor, but we don't think about it necessarily that way if we're moving into a neighborhood that makes us uncomfortable. And so gentrification with justice is, let's have a little justice if we're going to do it. And then the rest of it is we're just trying to fight the battle of getting more land.
I like that. Gentrification with justice, where free market capitalism meets the great commandment, right? I mean, that's sort of a beautiful thing for me. And the way you take consideration, not just in what's it going to do for you and how you can sell it and move on somewhere else, but what's it going to do to the overall neighborhood. Right. I love the example y'all have about that, of recognizing the control. And so if it's gentrifying around you, well, you know the importance of holding on to that, to keeping it affordable. Right. I think that's great. So obviously gentrification is a huge challenge for our city right now. We're growing like crazy. Everybody wants to be in Greenville because it's the cool place to be. As I heard somebody say one time, but cool always has a price. Most often it's those who get pushed out, right? So what's your greatest hope for the city? I mean, we can talk challenges all day, but what's your greatest hope for our city?
Yeah, I guess, a little bit of wake-up call, that we'll look around. And, I mean, I don't know about you, but the last 20 restaurants I've been in, every one of them had a help wanted sign. Every one of them. And so we look around and wake up and say, nobody's able to, my favorite restaurant's closed, and why did you close? Because I couldn't find anybody to serve. And why can't you find anybody? These people just need to get a job. Well, they couldn't get here because they had to live way out where they could afford it, and their transportation's not reliable enough. And I know that sounds oversimplistic, but it's a real thing. And if we don't have a good public transportation system to get them in and out, that's hard. And if they're paying too much for their rent out there, it's even harder. So I just hope a wake-up call is going to be in the future that we all look around and say, we don't want to be San Francisco where nobody can live there anymore because it's $2,500 for an 800 square foot apartment. And so the real regular people are not able to live here anymore. We don't want Greenville to be that. So anyway, that's kind of my short answer.
Yeah, no, I love that. So what's the role you hope the church will play in all of that?
That's a great question too. So I mean, I think churches, if you do a survey of churches across South Carolina, I bet they own more land than anybody. A lot of them in rural areas especially. And so, be a partner. We have churches that put us in their budget, and I'm not talking about money here, even though I just said that, but that's one way they get involved. But we have churches that donate land. We have churches that sponsor houses and sponsor families so they can get their hands dirty and work alongside our men to build the house, and et cetera. The churches are powerful. I've always felt like, God told us in the beginning, don't neglect to use the body of Christ in what you're doing. So we have what we call a 70-30 model. We produce 70% of our budget needs every year through housing, but we need the community for 30%. I don't know about you, but have you ever tried to pay 100% of your bills with 70% of your money? Doesn't add up. So we need the 30%. We need the community. We need the church to come alongside. Somebody told me one time, well, Don, you all are doing so well, you ought to just make it 100-0 and you don't need anybody. I said, no, that's not the model we want. We want to need you and get you involved and have volunteer opportunities and financial opportunities and sponsorship opportunities. I think social capital works this way too. You guys know a corporation who might sponsor, or you know another church who might sponsor something, or whatever the connection is. Sharing those connections works beautifully, and I think that's the role of the church, is let's just share our social capital.
Yeah, that's awesome. We got time for one more question if anybody's got one. We still have the dinner. We stopped the birdhouses. Yeah, I know. Yeah, we auction off trips to the Bahamas now. A little bit different than the birdhouse there.
2 weeks from tomorrow, we'll have dinner and auction. That's our big fundraiser of the year. It's at the Hyatt.
Can you still get tickets for it?
You can. And
go to their website.
May 23rd, and that's a Thursday night. And Bahama cruise, Bahama house. There's a Bahama house that's going to be auctioned off that comes with 8 bedrooms, its own private beach, its own boat, and the use of a boat captain for the whole week.
Nice.
How cool is that? Now, last year I went for $18,000, but
okay, never mind.
4 couples went in together, and they were wealthy couples, but that's not bad for them. So there's other stuff that me and you can afford. But the cool thing for us is not about the auction; it's about telling the story. They showed me the video today, and I've been doing this 20 years, and every video they show me every year makes me cry every time. And I was blubbering today, the stories that they've captured on video of people's lives have been changed. And I told one of my board members today, I would rather be around people like the guys in our program than anybody else. And I apologize, the highest church service you can put me in, I'll take hanging around our guys any day, because God is at work in their life, and they are hungry for Him to do something, and their appreciation for it is just amazing. And so you get to hear some of those stories is the real cool. You don't have to buy anything at auction. But I love if you came and just heard the stories and then said, let me tell so-and-so about that. They'd probably like that.
Don Oglesby, ladies and gentlemen. Let's thank you for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.